Chapter 16 Giving Freely.
We have some things to discuss,
Twilight said simply, sitting down in a chair on the other side of the bed from the sagging changeling. Even with the help of the chair, Twilight was only just at eye level with Chrysalis, who scoffed quietly in response, but said nothing more. Twilight observed Chrysalis for several moments, noticing instantly how she ignored her almost immediately to look back at Toneshift on the bed. Twilight felt her gaze lose some of its intensity as she took in a number of the little details in this scene. Chrysalis's distraught appearance, the fresh tear stains on her cheeks and on the side of the bed, as well as Chrysalis showing no aggression or hostility. She simply seemed resigned to whatever would happen next, her eyes having lost a great deal of whatever passion or intensity Twilight remembered them having on the occasions they had met in the past.
If we have things to discuss, start talking,
Chrysalis said shortly, earning a nod from Twilight.
First, I want to know how long you've been in Ponyville. How long have you been staying with Toneshift?
She asked carefully, observing the Queen's response.
If we discount time away in Baltimore with him, then maybe a week,
Chrysalis replied without hesitation.
I see.
Twilight sat back in her seat slightly, closing her eyes and giving some thought.
Then we need to talk about the terms of your stay.
Chrysalis shot Twilight a glance, narrowing her eyes but otherwise reacting very little.
A cage with visiting hours would be preferable.
Twilight clamped her jaw shut at that, tilting her head at Chrysalis.
What? You're going to put me in a dungeon, aren't you?
Chrysalis guessed bluntly, returning her eyes to Toneshift.
I'd like to make sure I can get visitors. What? No, we're not throwing you in a dungeon,
Twilight said quickly, drawing Chrysalis's attention far more than before.
What? When I said terms of your stay, I meant the ground rules you'll have to follow in Ponyville to avoid serious backlash,
Twilight explained, giving her hoof a few rolls to emphasize the point. Chrysalis blinked disbelievingly.
Forgive me if I am completely confused. Why do any of that? Because we know you're different now, Chrysalis,
Twilight said gently, leaning forward slightly with an almost friendly smile appearing on her face.
Luna's known about you for a few days already. She filled Princess Celestia and I in on what she knew when we found you in the forest after your fight with the Ursa.
Chrysalis stiffened at those words, looking at Toneshift.
The Luna Princess knew? She found out during one of Tone's nightmares about you getting caught. She heard the entire story from him and replayed all of the memories he had of you to confirm his statements,
Twilight furthered, leaning back into her chair once more. Chrysalis was silent for what felt like years. Finally, she looked down and sighed.
Okay, fine. What is Rule 1? Well, following the laws here in Equestria is the big one. Rule number 2 is that you don't go taking love energy from any pony without consent. Done.
Chrysalis butted in simply, looking down at Toneshift. Her lips began to press into a thin line.
Is one of these machines keeping him from waking up? Yes, why?
Twilight asked, somewhat caught off guard by the abrupt change in topic.
I noticed that his bones were put back into line. I ran a healing spell over him just before you got here. That was the spike in his heart rate. Oh, right. The heart beats really fast for a few seconds to get blood moving through the newly available tissue. That usually happens when healing magic is cast on some pony.
Twilight deduced immediately. Chrysalis only nodded. She looked down at Toneshift sadly.
I want to talk to him. Talking at his unresponsive face doesn't exactly move the conversation anywhere.
She gained a ghost of a smile at her attempt at morbid humor, but quickly lost the expression.
There are a few things I need to tell him.
Twilight stared at Chrysalis thoughtfully for several seconds. And then, a genuine, warm smile crept onto her face.
I guess Luna wasn't exaggerating. You've definitely changed, Chrysalis.
Chrysalis looked at Twilight skeptically, raising an eyebrow in a silent question.
The changeling queen I met years ago at my brother's wedding would have rather starved than say any of that. She would have been growling at me, mocking me, insulting me, and would have had this incredible ego around herself.
Twilight leaned forward again, her smile widening.
But look at you now! You're being reasonable, if a little blunt. You're not outright disrespecting me or your surroundings, and hey, you came to this hospital to talk to a pony you hurt. To apologize. Because you care about him. You've changed a lot in these last 6 months, Chrysalis. I'll be honest. I'm happy for you.
Chrysalis grunted impatiently.
As touching as this discussion is, I would appreciate you turning off whatever contraption is preventing him from waking up.
Twilight jumped slightly at Chrysalis's sharp tone and quickly set about unplugging the sedatives from Tone so he could start to wake up. As she went about doing so, Chrysalis softened her expression and sighed.
Sorry. It's fine.
The sedatives were undone. Toneshift remained asleep, though now there was nothing entering his body to keep him that way. It was just a waiting game now. Chrysalis shifted uneasily.
How long until he wakes up? It's probably going to be a little while. He already has a fair amount of pretty potent sedatives in him. I'd give him an hour before he wakes up enough to be coherent.
Twilight answered simply, running the numbers in her head rapidly for her result.
Joyous. Fine, then. Run the remaining terms by me. It'll give me something to pass the time with, if nothing else.
Twilight nodded with a smile before clearing her throat and getting underway.
Wake up, sleepyhead,
Chrysalis said gently to Toneshift, maybe 40 minutes later. He had been showing signs of waking up for a while now, slipping in and out of consciousness periodically. Twilight and Chrysalis had finished running through the terms of her time in Equestria maybe 5 minutes ago, and Twilight was now figuring that Tone should be coherent by now. He gave a low groan through his rather dry throat as he began to finally wake up. He shifted slightly, wincing as all of his still very tender skin moved. Motherfucker! He tried to exclaim, though it only came out in a weak murmur. Chrysalis smiled slightly before looking over at Twilight.
Could you bring us some water?
Twilight nodded slightly and trotted over to the sink to set about filling up one of the disposable plastic cups. Meanwhile, Chrysalis stayed next to the waking voice actor. What happened? Oh, my head. Where am I? Tone grumbled, moving a forehoof up to rub at his face and discovering that one of his eyes was covered up by bandages. Chrysalis couldn't help but giggle slightly as she realized something.
Wow, you look pathetic,
she whispered to him. Tone tried to open his good eye and then slammed it shut again as crust fell into it. Grunting and groaning uselessly, he tried to scrape and brush the offending material from his eye before Chrysalis stopped his hoof with telekinesis.
Here, allow me.
Twilight finished with the faucet, levitating the cup over to Chrysalis, who then, with her own magic, dipped a small cloth under the faucet. She got the fabric wet under the stream of water before bringing it over and, gently, so very gently, scrubbing Tone's good eye to clean it of intruders. When she was done, he managed to blink his eye open and look around, not only seeing colorful blobs at the moment. Where am I? What's going on? Tone asked before Chrysalis passed him the cup of water.
Shh, drink up first.
She looked to Twilight.
Leave us, please. All right.
Twilight gave a small nod and a professional bow of her head before stepping out. Chrysalis snorted before looking back at Tone, who had just finished the cup and looked greatly refreshed. Oh, that's better. His vision must have corrected itself as he looked at Chrysalis with a mildly confused expression. Chrysalis, what happened? Before he could finish the question, he must have remembered what had happened to put him here. His eyes widened, and he looked at Chrysalis with a rapidly wilting expression. Chrysalis's own face fell upon seeing him shift like that.
I am so sorry that I got you hurt, Tone Shift. You didn't deserve that.
She sighed and closed her eyes.
Don't think about it. Just do it.
Chrysalis...
Quiet!
Chrysalis suddenly said, more harshly than she intended, flinching immediately.
Sorry. This isn't easy for me. I hope you understand.
She looked back up at him directly in the eye. What are you... Chrysalis shook her head sharply, looking at him with pleading eyes.
Tone, please, just... don't say anything. Don't make me think about this.
She took several deep breaths before continuing, making sure Tone stayed quiet.
You have given me so much to think about. You've helped me in such a way that I can never hope to repay you in full. You saved my life, even when you had no good reason to do so. You kept me in your home, and befriended me when you had even less reason to do so.
Chrysalis reached a foreleg up to her chest and rested it there. Tone's eyes widened as he realized there was a very soft, gentle light coming from her heart and shining through her chitin.
You came to see me as more than a refugee. First a lost soul to be put back on track, then a good friend you'd go out of your way for. And then...
She closed her eyes and smiled softly, a tear streaking down her cheek.
And then you began to love me without even realizing it. You saw so much in me, even though you knew who and what I was.
She opened her eyes to look at him again, reaching her other foreleg out to rest on the side of the bed next to Tone's foreleg.
I have never felt a pony give love so freely, especially when they knew it was me, Chrysalis, Queen of the Changelings. They were giving that love too. It was unconditional, pure.
Chrysalis stood and set the hoof on her chest down next to Tone's head. She leaned over him and saw him looking back up at her with his good eye as wide as a dinner plate and a soft red tint coming to his cheeks. That sealed it. No turning back now.
I never really let that love go returned without some string attached. No more. It's time I give freely.
She whispered before, with no other warning, leaning down and kissing Toneshift on the lips. Toneshift tensed up in shock at the sudden contact before melting into it, wrapping his forelegs around Chrysalis's shoulders and returning the kiss honestly and tenderly. A few seconds later, Chrysalis slowly, almost reluctantly, pulled away. Tone's eye looked down and then squinted as the light from Chrysalis's heart began to grow in brightness and intensity rapidly. "What, Chrysalis? What's happening?" he asked in alarm, and Chrysalis found herself lifting off of her hooves without any input on her part. She looked down at her body for a moment, a final flicker of fear and anxiety on her face, before she smiled and relaxed. Her face became peaceful and content.
It's fine, Toneshift. This only solidifies what I'm about to say.
With a deep breath, Chrysalis closed her eyes, bracing herself for what was to come.
I love you.
The light from her heart expanded and grew in intensity to the point it was blinding. The energy externalized itself from her body, appearing as glowing sheets that wrapped around her and then solidified into a bright blue cocoon. The cocoon floated lazily in the air for a moment before drifting down to touch the floor. Another explosion of light, forcing Tone to cover his eye and shield it with a foreleg to avoid being blinded. Finally, the light faded away and he could see again. Opening his eyes slowly, he gasped as he saw Chrysalis, who had just undergone a sudden and impressive change. Her chitin was no longer black. It was now a bright yellow at the tips of her hooves, fading into an almost white, buttery color the farther up the body he looked. Her mane and tail were now beautifully colored in a soft gradient from bright blue to an almost yellow-green. Her wings were no longer the ragged shapes they had used to be, now appearing as full, bright purple wings that carried a profound grace to them. Her horn was no longer crooked, and instead came into a perfectly curved point. The holes in her legs had filled in completely. Most noticeable of all were her eyes. They had become deep pools of bright blue that slowly opened with uncertainty, looking towards Toneshift almost as if she were seeking his approval. His jaw was slack at the sight. For almost a minute he simply looked at her, dumbfounded, before an enormous goofy grin broke out across his face. And then he started laughing. Chrysalis frowned in confusion.
What the hell is so funny?
Nothing, so to speak. Toneshift said before taking a deep breath to hold off his giggles. That was one hell of a first kiss you just gave me. Chrysalis rolled her eyes at him.
Oh, shush. I'm certain you've kissed some pony before me.
Actually, no. You just gave me my first kiss, honest. And frankly, I don't think even your most powerful memory-wiping spell could make me forget it. Tone said with a giddy smile still clinging to his face. Chrysalis simply tutted at him before shifting uneasily.
Well, how do I look?
She asked almost timidly. Tone simply smiled more softly and affectionately, reaching a foreleg out in a come-hug-me gesture. Chrysalis didn't hesitate, coming in and hugging him once more. And after a moment, Tone leaned back just enough to kiss her softly on the lips before smiling at her. You're beautiful. Just don't forget that your appearance doesn't matter to me, Toneshift said before poking her in the chest. You do. Chrysalis simply gave a content hum before stealing another quick kiss.
I could get used to this.
Please do. For several moments, the two simply basked in the comfort of the other's presence. Finally, Chrysalis looked at him in the eye with a hopeful look in her own.
I think I'll ask for that happy ending now.
Tone chuckled before nuzzling her affectionately. I think you already earned it.
Thank you very much for tuning in to this chapter of The Bug and the Herd by me. If you enjoyed any of what you heard, please consider leaving a like. If you're not already, consider subscribing. And if you're really feeling incredibly generous and really want to support me in what I do, then there's a link to my Patreon down in the description below. Thank you very much for any and all support, be it like, sub, favorite, whatever. It's all helpful. I appreciate it all. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.